Every time a new map comes out for Dead by Daylight, the only thing I ever really care about is the TV spawns. Are they any good? Is the TV range coverage overall for the map good? Is this just a good map in general for Sadako? So that's what we're going to be looking at today with Ormond Lake Mine here. Since this wasn't in existence yet when I made my guide a little while ago, this came in during the winter event most recently. So we're going to be taking a look at some of the TV ranges that we could potentially see in this map in particular. As I'm sure you can see, we're using SketchUp this time around instead of just using a layout image of the map and just slapping in my TV and gen spread that I had in my test matches. Here I'm doing the same thing, but it's just in 3D, so we could get that 3D visual of what those condemn ranges will be looking like. So with any other map in the game, they're all tile-based. So each individual tile that we see here, 8 meters by 8 meters. And that, of course, means that the clusters of importance tiles, like with jungle gyms and shack, most notably, will be 16 by 16. And here we could see 4 jungle gym tiles with shack. Interestingly, this jungle gym right next to shack, so pretty good combination of loops for survivors, as well as this one right next to main building. Also not too far from this one either, with a filler loop right there as well. Also, I've included a lot of the permanent stays in this map. So, for instance, the pipes here, like the submerged one that you could go through and also go over by shack, as well as the little tower right next to it, and the stack of 3 pipes right outside of the other edge. And then, of course, the tower in the top here, that 2-story tower. That's really nobody has any reason to go onto that second story, but this will be here as well. A very common gen spawn here. And then, of course, we have the main building itself. So how good is this main building? Firstly, in terms of the TV, I've never seen it not spawn right here in this little nook on that second floor right next to its gen on the railing, or at least right up against that railing by this drop down point here. For the main building itself, I believe there is 4 pallets, if I'm not mistaken, one on the outside edge on that second floor right here, a decent one right here that's a little bit hard to mind game, but it's still doable. All these pallets in here are mind gameable, but they're not necessarily completely unsafe. We got one down here by the forklift as well, and then one in the room with the TV also. Notably, there's also one pretty strong window for main building here, right here under this ramp outside in the back with a breakable wall right next to it here. Very strong loop for survivors if they do use this window frequently, which in that case, you're always going to have to break this wall to deal with it. And as mentioned, you can easily loop from the bottom floor at least over into this jungle gym right outside. So important to keep that in mind. But we're not here to talk about that. We're here to talk about the TVs. So let's take a look at where they all are, at least in this case for the test game that I had. First up, we have a gen here, partially shoved inside of this pipe here, right outside of the submerged pipe, which is where we're going to find our first TV. So this TV's on that shack side. Not a lot of room to work with in here, but it's still close enough to this gen here that it has decent projection pressure for it. And then not too far from that is this other one here. It's right next to a hill that would otherwise be right here. On the bottom of that, of course, with its TV pretty much right next to it. So very good projection pressure on that one as well. Our third one is right here, just outside of this TL loop that I had, at least this jungle gym tile here. The gen spawned for me at least right outside of that, with the TV for it being just on the outer edge of the L wall. Not too far from this TV, but farther than some of the other ones here. Still decent enough projection pressure. And I had another one spawn directly inside of this jungle gym tile here, in this case a 4-lane, with that TV right next to the gen over here, right in that center lane by the window. Then 3 others to go. One here on an outside loop with this TV not too far from it, to be fair, but overall still pretty good projection pressure. And certainly that is the case with this second to last one here, number 6, in the little tower in the top left by main building. So there's not a lot of room to really work around in this area. These inside edges for the interior area here are filled with debris, so you could only really go in the center and in the outer ring as well, and of course on that second floor. But again, nobody's really going to be going up here for too many reasons. This TV is just a few feet away from this gen here, so very strong projection pressure there. That, of course, just leaves us with the main building, TV, and gen, which we already talked about. So now let's get to the more interesting part in terms of this video, which is the ranges themselves. So let's get back to this bird's eye view here and pull up the 16-meter range, which is default without using videotape copy. So here we get pretty decent coverage overall, to be quite honest here. So especially in comparison to Ormond Resort or Mount Ormond Resort, which is a much bigger map than this one is, so it's nice that this one's a little bit smaller. Having good coverage here is what we were initially worried about for Ormond Lake Mine. In the center, there are some gaps, notably between this jungle gym headed towards this jungle gym, but the gaps are still quite small, so not that concerning. The more concerning gaps, though, are that jungle gym itself, which, as we see, at least in this case, only very partially covered for TV range. And then the arguably strongest jungle gym in the map here that loops right into main building, or chains into it rather, is completely covered, or completely clear, I should say, in this particular case. There's also that filler loop here as well that will be, in this case, half covered. Another big gap to consider as well is the back of main building here. So again, I've never seen this TV not spawn here, which means this is always going to be a safe area in this very back edge with this back pallet right over here and to that door that leads right out to this safer jungle gym in this corner here. So that is an unfortunate gap in our main building here, as well as in the back half of the room with the window, but that one's not as big of a deal in this particular case. Okay. So now let's also take a look at what videotape copy does for us here. So let's go ahead and turn that one on as well. And as expected, it fills in a lot of the gaps. That's all we really want to see in a case like this. So for instance, that center area where we saw some gaps, especially between these two jungle gyms, now pretty much fully covered, which is what we'd want to see with videotape copy. That's the reason why it's such a good add-on. It fills in all those gaps in the map. But for the areas where our coverage was lacking initially, at least in this case for this jungle gym, we'll get about 30 or so % coverage now. So overall decent for that. A lot more coverage here in Shack, but at least in this case, still a big portion of it, even the pallet door and the window are uncovered, unfortunately. And the back area of main building and, of course, the jungle gym right next to it, still pretty clear. We finally have the pallet in range with the 18 meters here, in this particular case at least, but not that doorway, which will chain into that jungle gym out there. Another aspect to keep in mind with this map is the underground tunnel that goes in between main building and the tower here. This little box here is a little hard to see through the ranges, but this is where that staircase would be, and then that will come up right here. So in terms of the verticality that we have with the TV coverages, we're still pretty just about fully covered in that underground area. I don't have it laid out directly here, but as we can see, this box right here is where that staircase is from main building, and that goes up to this area. So we'll have some openings down there, but about half of it, I would say, would be covered by the condemn range of the TVs above. Let's be honest, nobody really is going to be using that tunnel, at least from what I've seen. There's no super important purpose to be going down there for traveling, but if they do, they will be in range, most of the time at least, of some TVs upstairs on the ground floor, which at that point, if they're down there, they're pretty far away from them. So pretty good condemn pressure if survivors do happen to be using that area down there. So is this an overall good map for Sadako? In terms of comparing it to Mount Ormond Resort, certainly. Mount Ormond Resort being much bigger, the main building not as strong for condemning, is good for Ormond Lake Mine. So let's also take a look at this main building again in terms of the condemn range here. So notably, the TV's on the second floor in comparison with Mount Ormond Resort. That TV is always going to be on the first floor, but here we have it on the second floor. The second floor is always going to be the ideal spot for TV, since it'll just naturally have more condemn pressure for any survivors outside or any survivors that are running into main building from outside, since if they want to turn that TV off, if they need to deposit a tape into it, they have to go inside and upstairs to access that TV instead of just going inside and accessing that TV. It would be much better though if the generator here was on the first floor, or the opposite floor at least, instead of the second floor here. Since in this case, the TV has good projection pressure for this gen, but not good condemn pressure. Since if you have a survivor working on this gen right here, it'll take just a few seconds for them to turn this TV off whenever they need to. But if this TV, or this gen rather, was on the first floor instead of the second floor, then they'd have to go all the way upstairs to turn that off, if that happened to be the case. It's not in this case. So the projection pressure and condemn pressure for the gen is full projection pressure and zero condemn pressure. But when it comes to the building itself, if survivors are just running into it, using it as a loop, or coming into it to interact with this TV, either to grab a tape or deposit it, then it has good condemn pressure instead of projection pressure. So that's overall pretty nice. But yeah, I would definitely consider this a big improvement over Mount Ormond Resort, to the point where I would consider it good for Sadako overall. The coverage here, very good overall. Only some gaps on the edges. The main interior of the map is all fully covered here. I would place this probably in between Dead Dog Saloon and Sanctum of Wrath, well, original Sanctum of Wrath on the tier list that I had, with Sanctum of Wrath, the original version, being on top, then Ormond Lake Mine, then Dead Dog Saloon. So other important things to keep in mind here are some likely deposit targets for survivors. So most notably with the tower here in the very top corner, this one is the furthest TV from pretty much the entirety of the rest of the map. So for instance, if a survivor takes a tape out of this TV, or out of this TV, or this TV, they're very likely going to be headed in this direction, assuming that we have a TV here in this tower. So if you are in an instance where a survivor has taken a tape, you see they've taken a tape, but you don't know exactly which tape they've taken, but you can narrow it down to one of these three, they're likely going to be headed in this direction. So you can kind of get an idea of where you're going to want to be patrolling if you do want to intercept them specifically. You can kind of do the exact same thing, but in the opposite. So for instance, if they take a tape from the tower here, or from here, or even from main building, they're likely going to be headed down by Shack, either in Shack itself, if Shack happens to be where the TV and Gen are, or in the pipe here, if this is where this TV has spawned. So you can kind of, again, get an idea of where patrolling is needed if you do want to intercept people on their tape runs. It's likely going to be in between Shack and the pipe outside of it, and the tower next to main building itself. Okay, so that'll cover my opinions on Ormond Lake Mine. Let's get another bird's eye view of the full condemn range here with videotape copy, and let's see it again without videotape copy. That's it normally. Now back with videotape copy. So again, pretty good pressure in terms of condemn range. I would say this is a good map for Sadako.